Hi everybody and welcome. My name is Julie Mann. I am a professional network marketer, an actor and an EFT practitioner, and I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by Alice Shikina. Hi Alice.
Hi Julie, thanks
So
for having me.
pleasure, it's really lovely to see you. So Alice is actually a mediator. So before we get into talking about the work that you do, Alice, how about you start by telling us your story?
So it's funny because you and I actually share the whole theater background. I was in theater for probably a little over 20 years. Not like you where I'm doing professional theater, but I started when I was young, when I was 13. And I went to a special school for, part of it was like for acting. And then I went on to major in acting and graduate with a BFA. And then I also went and studied, didn't get my master's, but studied for my master's in directing. And so I have a lot of years of acting and directing under my belt. And so eventually when I became, it didn't happen like quite one after the other, but eventually when I became a mediator, all the people skills, all the psychology that you learn in theater when you are an actor actually comes directly into play when you're mediating, because, you're reading the subtext of what's happening in the room. You're listening for like what's not being said. And as an actor, that you're trying to affect other people emotionally. And so I'm trying to affect calm in my clients. So they're very upset, but I'm trying to make sure that they stay calm. So everything I do and everything I say is in order to keep them calm and relaxed so that they can get through the mediation. So I use all those same skills, even though I'm not in theater anymore.
So, because they're the ones that are doing the drama, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So before we get into that, I just want to touch a little bit more on that, because you said that you've worked as an actor, you've also worked as a director. So what was it you absolutely loved about that? What was your favorite thing?
Of acting or directing or both?
Either or both.
I started off really enjoying acting as a little girl. So since I was 7, I wanted to become an actress. And I think it's just because I was very dramatic and I had a lot of emotions, and theater allowed me to get all of that out and, use my emotional life. But then eventually I became more interested in directing, and I loved directing because you have an overall control of the vision, right? So I can look at the production and say, this is how I want the production to look. And then I'm able to work with the actors to get them to where they need to be. I'm able to work with all the different designers so that we can get the lighting and the sound and the set to look like, close to my vision. But I also love the collaborative work. So it's not like it's just it's everyone's vision together, but I'm sort of the conductor. So I really, really enjoyed directing very, very much.
I love that. And I guess a lot of actors don't direct and a lot of directors don't act. So having both those talents and being able to bring that all together, what it's like from the actor's perspective, and you know how to get the best out of the actors presumably as well.
Exactly. Yes. So I'm able to give them, I'm able to talk to them in actor speak, right? Because I've been in productions where directors are giving me line reads and I'm like, this is really terrible. Like, I don't want as an actor to get a line reading from a director, right? You want the director to be able to coach you so that you become a better actor, not so that you can just give a line reading. And so as a director, I definitely coached all the actors so that they gave the best performance that they could, because I'm really helping them dig really deep into their own experiences, into their own memory, into their past, to be able to bring forth the different types of emotions and imagination that they need in order to play the role like very well.
So just for those people that maybe don't really know what line acting is, are you saying that those directors that say it like this?
Yes,
That's the worst thing, isn't it?
Yes, it's the worst, because you as an actor can't grow with that kind of direction. If I say, Julie, say it like this, go home now. And you're supposed to exactly copy my inflection, my speed, my tone. Like that does you a disservice as an actress.
Yeah. And actually, I remember I worked at the National Theatre, and before I actually took over in a role, I actually was understudying. And as an understudy, we had far less rehearsal time. So mostly the characters had already kind of been established and people had been playing those characters in rehearsal. long before the understudies came in. So it would have been the easiest thing to just kind of parrot, what the actor said on stage. But actually, you have to develop the character for yourself, don't you?
Absolutely. Because then if you don't do that, then the performance feels empty, right? You can be saying the words, you can be saying them with inflection and emotion, but if the emotion is not coming from your authentic place, then it doesn't move people.
No.
We want to see you being moved. We want to see you, Julie, being like so moved or sad or anything like that, right? But if you're just faking it, like we can feel it, right? It's authenticity that people watch movies and plays because they're looking for authenticity.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And it's not just in acting, is it? It's like, in business, if people are talking to someone else and all they want is the sale, or, they're not really interested in someone else, we can feel that, can't we?
Exactly.
Yeah. So as a mediator, they need to know that you absolutely are on their side and you're in it. You're kind of, yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So one of the things I know you pride yourself on is your emotional intelligence. How would you define emotional intelligence? And when did you realize that you actually had that skill?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure when I realized it, but I've always been very good at, it's not just reading people, it's knowing where they are. So I was the person who all through college and beyond, where people would come to me and say, Alice, I have this terrible problem. I haven't told anybody. I'm going to tell you. Right. And I slowly started to realize that it's not so much that I had this talent. I started to realize that other people were not having that same experience. They were not having people come to them telling them their deepest secrets to say, hey, I need your help. Let me tell you something I haven't told anyone else, because it happened to me very, very frequently. And I think that the main reason why that happens to me is because I'm not judgmental, and people sense that I'm not judgmental. So they feel like they can trust me with whatever story they have, right? That I will take their story in and they're in a safe space with me. I'm not going to judge them, and I'm not going to say like, you should never do that. That's a terrible idea, right? That I'm just there to listen and be there with them and help like share the experience. And so in the same sense, when people come to mediation, you have to really trust your mediator. You're coming to your mediator with your deepest, darkest stuff, the stuff that you don't want your friends and family to see, because it's what you cannot resolve on your own, right? You need another party's help. And so there's that, I feel like there's that stigma in society that people don't want their friends to know that they have to like employ a mediator, because in some sense, that's like admitting to their friends, yeah, I can't do it by myself. Like I had to ask someone else. But, when they come to me, I am there with open arms. I'm there judgment free. And so I feel like people come to me and talk to me and use me as a mediator because of the fact that I don't judge people. They can tell me whatever story they want, whatever things have happened or whatever things they've done. And I don't judge them for that.
And doesn't mediator stand for middle of?
Yes. So I am not an advocate. So I like to think of myself as an ally, but not an advocate, right? So I cannot advocate for either side, but I can be there to support both sides. I'm there to make people feel like they're heard. I'm there to make sure that you're not misunderstood, right? So then in that sense, as your mediator, you should feel like I'm taking care of you, even if I'm not advocating for your whatever it is that you want, for your side, your perspective. I'm not advocating, but I am making sure that you, Julie, are heard very clearly by the person that you're talking to.
And sometimes that's all we want, isn't it? Is just to be heard. Do you find sometimes that you mediate and someone suddenly is heard for the first time, and then actually they go and resolve that relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not so much that I do a lot of divorce mediations. And so it's not like they decide that they're not going to get a divorce in the middle of a divorce mediation, but a lot of times people hear the other person for the first time. Yep, during the mediation. And I do some with kids as well. Like I've mediated between teenagers and their parents. And sometimes the parents are hearing the kids for the first time.
Wow.
That there's a lot of conflict. There's not much listening going on. Most of the time, the parents are lecturing or telling them like, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. And then there is very little solicitation of information from the teenager. So when we sit down, I ask all the questions like, how are you feeling and why are you doing what you're doing? And they will start to express it once they feel comfortable. And it will usually be a surprise to the parents.
Wow. And actually, then the parents aren't going to divorce their children. They're just,
Right.
there's going to be some hopefully positive outcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So what do you specifically do, Alice? Because we hear the word mediator, but actually what specifically do you do?
So if you were to go into a mediation, I first let you know that it's a confidential space, that I have ground rules. So ground rules are very important in a mediation, right? So I let people know that they can't yell at each other. They can't interrupt each other. They can't call each other names, and they just generally can't get upset, right? And so I let them know ahead of time what the consequences are. And usually what I say is, if any of these happen, I'm going to be the one interrupting. I'm going to stop the bad behavior. Right. So in some ways, the mediator plays referee, right, to make sure that everyone's playing by the rules of the game, which is to be polite and respectful. If they cannot, sometimes they cannot, then I have tools. I use the mirroring tool. If I feel like people are just waiting to respond and they're not really listening, I will ask them, I'm going to have you repeat what the other person said, what you understood them to say. So then they have to perk up a little bit and they have to listen a little bit more. And then if they really, really can't do that, like they start to get very anxious and upset, because sometimes in family mediations where people have 50 years of conflict going on, it takes an eye roll, right? It takes one person to be like, and then it sets the other person off. Like really small things they're setting each other off. So then I might put them into separate rooms. So if it's Zoom, we put them in different Zoom rooms. If it's in person, we just split and go to different rooms, and I go back and forth. And that's called shuttle mediation. And so I go back and forth, and then until everyone can calm down, and then we can come back together and continue talking. The other thing is I guide the conversation. So people generally, this is like a generality, but it happens with most people. And I'm sure when you read plays, it's written into the play, it's baked into the dialogue. People have a tendency to repeat the past when they're upset about it. Well, you cheated on me last year. So what's the big deal that I'm cheating on you this year? And you cheated on me a whole bunch of, you know what I mean? People bring up things in the past and then the conversation spirals. This happens almost every time there's any sort of emotional component. People want to go back and rehash the past. So I really try hard not to let that happen. So I let people be heard one time. That's my rule, my one-time rule. You can say it one time. I want to hear you. Everyone can hear you. And then after that, I'm like, Julie, we heard what you said. And that is actually not helping us move forward in the conversation. So we're going to switch tracks and we're going to continue talking about this because this is not helping us resolve the problem. So I will remind people we need to stay focused on the problem at hand, not dissolve into some sort of argument about you did this and I did this, and then there's sometimes people also can't agree on the fact pattern. So you might say, well, I told you to come on Sunday, but you didn't show up until Tuesday. And I might say, I never told you that. Well, then we have a difference of opinion of the facts. I may say, no, I told you very clearly I'm coming on Tuesday. And you said, no, you told me you're coming on Sunday. And we could argue all night about that, right? But then I will choose a time that we need to stop that conversation and move forward. Without me there, people stay stuck in those cycles. They continually argue about whatever it was in the past or whatever was said or the fact pattern. And so I break all of those. I also ask a lot of questions, right? So I might say, well, what were you thinking when you made that decision? Why did you make that decision? Right? Or, what did you think would happen if, you did this, right? So I ask questions that usually have not been asked before. So I'm digging for new information so that we can help resolve the conflict, right? Because most times, human beings leave a lot of information uncovered or covered, right? They never actually discover it. It's just left and they never bother to ask. I frequently ask people, did you find out why they did this? Did you find out what they're feeling? No. The answer is always no.
Interesting, isn't it? So you mentioned Zoom, that sometimes, it happens on Zoom. Do you work globally then, Alice?
Yes, I can work globally. As a mediator, you have to have a certification, but you're not licensed. So unlike attorneys that need to be licensed and they can only work in the state where they're licensed or the countries and whatnot, mediation is really it's a skill to work with people, right? I don't need to know the law. What I need to know is how to help people communicate better, how to help people hear each other better. So that actually doesn't require a license. It just requires certification. So I can work globally. Yes.
Brilliant. So how would someone know if they needed a mediator?
Good question. So there are many types of reasons people need mediators. The most obvious one is if they're going through a divorce. You can still get an attorney to advise you, but if you want to sit down and talk about it with your soon-to-be ex-spouse about how you want to divide everything up, and you just want to get through a conversation and you need help because it's too emotional for everyone, that's a really good reason to get a mediator. Landlord tenants. Always a great reason to get a mediator if there's some kind of issue. It could be commercial landlord tenants. It could be residential landlord tenants. Very typically, there's something that goes wrong and they immediately sign up with lawyers. And once you both get lawyers, you can't talk to each other. And sometimes the issue is not really big enough for a lawyer. Sometimes it's like, hey, let's sit down and talk, right? You can maybe go get advice from an attorney to find out what you should or shouldn't be doing or what your rights are. But it's always good to just sit down and talk and come up with a deal. If you can't pay your rent or you need to move out early, you need to break the lease, sit down with a mediator if you feel like you can't sit down, directly with the landlord or with the tenant, right? Also, a lot of family conflicts and conservatorships and probates. So when families can't agree on splitting up, maybe someone passed away and they left a home or a lot of assets, right? And then they're fighting over it, really good idea to get a mediator and just have the whole family agree, sit down and talk about it and figure things out. The mediator can help problem solve it. The one caveat that's very difficult to get over in mediation is that everyone has to agree to mediate. It is a voluntary process. So if you have 5 parties and they all need to buy in and one party says, heck no, I am not mediating, I'd rather take this to court and fight it, then mediation is dead in the water, unfortunately.
I imagine, though, it's a much more cost-effective way of doing things. I mean,
absolutely.
Also, it means that there's some salvaging of the relationship, that there's potential to move forward beyond the divorce or beyond whatever the settlement is and create a relationship where there's much more harmony because there's been that listening and there's been that,
Yes, but it also keeps the power amongst the parties, right? If you go to court, you're giving up power to either a judge or a jury. And, here in the States, people have a romanticized view of going to court. Like, I'm going to have my day in court. I want to get justice. Unfortunately, we have a very broken justice system, and judges, whatever they decide on is actually quite arbitrary. It's based on their experience and their values and their opinions, right? So it's not like, oh, justice was served. It's one human being who made a call. And if you think about a jury, one of the judges, and I find this to be really, really accurate, they said, next time you're standing at the post office in line, look at the 12 people standing in front of you. That's your jury. It's just 12 random people. Most of them don't even want to be there. Do you want 12 random people making a decision that's very, very important to you in your life? Like, you should think about that, right?
Oh my goodness, that's a scary prospect, really.
Exactly.
Wow, I love that visual. So have you got any advice, Alice, for couples maybe, or somebody who's in a relationship right now and they're just going through a really rough patch? What advice would you give someone?
So I would say the most important thing that people do not do, it's something that it's so easy, but it's not. It's very hard and very easy at the same time, is to listen. It's really to listen to each other. And if people are having a hard time, I suggest they do a very simple exercise. And the most difficult part is just doing it, is committing to doing it. It takes less than 5 minutes a day. So sit down with your partner and give each other, say, 2 minutes. So I would talk for 2 minutes nonstop. And then you would tell me at the end of the 2 minutes what I said. And then you would talk for 2 minutes nonstop. And at the end of that, you would take about a minute. Okay, so it's like 6 minutes. 6-minute exercise where you tell me everything that I said, right? And just practice it on a daily basis. and you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, right? But the key is the other person who is listening only listens. They don't ask questions. They don't interrupt. They don't say, can you clarify? Or say, you know what I mean? You can't say any of that. You just only listen, right? And so if you practice that, you'll get better and better at it. But one of the biggest reasons why people's relationships are falling apart is because they don't listen to each other. They don't listen to the needs that they each are trying to express. And so then they begin to yell louder and louder because why? They're not being heard.
That's such great, simple advice. Thank you, Alice. Obviously, you're absolutely passionate about what you do, and I think that's so important. It radiates through you. What do you love most about your job?
So I have this video that I made as a cartoon, and I'm going to describe it to you because that's how I feel like my clients are. So if you see two birds and they've been trapped underneath a net and they're fluttering around, but they can't actually fly anywhere. They're just stuck underneath that net. And then I come and I just take that net away and then they fly away. And that's what I feel like I do for people. They're stuck inside of this conflict. That net is the conflict. And they're stuck and they're not going anywhere and they're rotating around and they're flopping around. And to be able to free people from that, to be able to like help remove that heavy conflict and have them fly and be free and find new passions and find a new life. Like that really is, what I love about the work that I do.
I love that. I love that. So I know that one of the other things you do is you're really into kickboxing, aren't you? So how did you get into that?
I was taking a kickboxing class maybe about 11 years ago. And my coach at the time said, hey, do you want to fight? And I was like, what do you mean? Not really. I've never competed in a combat sports, right? And so I sat on that decision for probably 2 months and really thought hard about it. And it was very, very scary to think about going and competing at a national tournament in kickboxing when I have never done anything like that before. And I was almost 40 at the time. So most of my competitors would be 20-year-old women, like half my age. So I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And there were many things that I weighed, but I finally realized, you know what? I will have an opportunity to be trained by an ex-professional kickboxer. He used to be a professional kickboxer. So that's a great opportunity. And also, I'm the type of person that walks towards all of her fears. If I'm afraid of something, I'll just walk towards it, go inside of it, and come out on the other side. So fighting someone that I didn't know was very scary for me. So I thought, why not just face my fear and let's just do it. So I trained for 3 months. It's the most grueling training to train for a kickboxing competition because you are training probably 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, trying to lose a lot of weight. I had to lose 15 pounds in 3 months. And it's very lonely because no one else is training like you are, right? There are other people who are helping me to train, but they're not out there training 3 hours a day and you're exhausted and you have to fight a lot of mental demons, right? Because there's all the fear coming at you saying, oh my gosh, and you don't know who your fighter is. So you can't look online and watch a video of somebody and learn everything because you don't know who they are. They're getting assigned to you the day of. So, that itself, you have to learn to control that mental fear. And, emotionally, you're like kind of all over the place because you're exhausted and worn down. So then you tend to get more emotional. So you have to control that as well. So I did that for 3 months and then everything clicked the night before the fight. So I was sitting down with a bunch of other kickboxers and several coaches were talking. And one of the coaches said to everyone, the fight is over. The past 3 months was the fight. And tomorrow is the cherry on top. Go in and enjoy it. And that very small change of perspective was huge because the next day I wasn't nervous at all when I normally would have been because I realized it's true. Like the past 3 months have been hell. It was very, very difficult. It was very, very scary. And now I have 2 minutes or 5 minutes in the ring and I should be good to go. So I was like totally calm right before I stepped into the ring. Now I didn't go to win, but I also did not get knocked out. I hung in there all 3 rounds. So wow. I feel like I take a lot of those into my business, right? A lot of those values. and a lot of the strength that I picked up training for that into my business, because you have to, be in control of the fears that come into your mind on a daily basis. Is my business going to survive? Am I going to get enough work this month? That sort of thing. And you really have to keep it contained and keep it controlled and stay positive.
Wow. And do you still kickbox?
So I do a little bit. It's more for cardiovascular.
Yeah.
I've moved a little bit more to jujitsu because it's a little easier on the joints, and you're not getting like kicked all over the place. So so I'm doing that. Although currently, because of shelter in place, that has been put on hold. But I really enjoy jujitsu as well.
Incredible. Of all the things you've done in your life, Alice, what are you most proud of?
So a couple of things, and they both have to do with writing. So I'm not a prolific writer. I don't write tons and tons of things, but my parents are both from Okinawa, Japan. And I don't know if many of your listeners are aware, but there was a Battle of Okinawa during World War II. And so most of the fight that was happening in Japan took place on that island. And so when my parents grew up there, they were born like right before the war ended. So they were 2 and 4 years old when the war ended. They lived in Okinawa, and all of a sudden, everything's been destroyed. There's a story there where a lot of nurses, 16-year-old girl nurses, were conscripted by the army to move into caves, get like very cursory nursing training, and they had to tend to the wounded soldiers. And so there's a museum there. And so I wrote a play about that. And one day somebody discovered it and wanted to put it on in Hawaii. So they performed it in Hawaii. And this is it was actually a perfectly aged group, because they were high schoolers, because the characters are also high schoolers. So then they took it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So it went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So it took a life of its own. So it was quite amazing. And the other amazing part of that story is that there was a woman who was one of those girl nurses. She was 80 years old at the time, and she flew her and her son from the big island of Hawaii to Oahu to watch my play. And before they walked into the theater, she told her 60-year-old son, "This is my story that I never told you."
Oh my goodness, that sends shivers. That's incredible. Did you get to see it?
I got to see it. Yes. I saw it when I was in Hawaii. And it was really, really incredible. And that story also gave me chills that, my words were like, helped that woman share her personal story with her son. And then the other thing that I did that's writing is that last week I published a book. It's a very short handbook called How to Negotiate with Your Kids. And it's the type of handbook that I always wish I had. It's short, it's sweet. I want 100% of the people who pick it up to actually read the whole thing. So it's not very many pages. And my mom illustrated it. She painted everything with watercolor.
How lovely. And is that available on Amazon?
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. I've got one last question, but I absolutely love the way you pronounce Edinburgh. Perfect. Yeah, obviously I'm going to post your links below. So if anyone needs a mediator, reach out to Alice and make contact. But one final question. When you're no longer on this planet, Alice, how would you like to be remembered?
That's a good one. I would like people to remember me as someone full of life, someone with lots of energy, somebody who like accomplished a lot, not necessarily professionally, just generally in my life, that I did a lot of things. And with my kids, I've got 2 teenagers, and I always think about this, the way I want to be remembered by them. You're going to laugh. You know how when like a lot of people, they like remember their parents or their mothers by what they cooked? Like my mom's lasagna or my mom's this. So when I die, I want my kids to remember me for all the things that I cooked for them.
Fabulous. Love it. Alice, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. I really enjoyed it.